During Black History Month, we remember every single person is made in the image of God. Because America has failed to do that with people of color, we stop. And we take time to remember all our images of God and to remember important people and events arising out of African American history, including troubles that started with the African Diaspora. Diaspora refers to people being displaced from their homeland. In the Bible, there's diaspora when the Hebrews left Egypt for the Promised Land. There's diaspora when they were exiled from Israel to Babylon. African diaspora includes men, women, and children being violently kidnapped and shipped and sold into brutal enslavement. And many African Americans are descendants of Africans exiled, enslaved, and dominated by violence and oppression in America. This month we take time to remember that and Black Americans overcoming that. It's good to remember that even in the deepest, darkest places of brutality and despair, the God who opposes oppression, the God who sides with justice, the God who loves and values all, the God of Jesus helped enslaved Americans and helps their oppressed descendants to this day. Slave owners and traders and many others in the culture who supported slavery claimed to practice Christianity and introduced Americans who were enslaved to the Bible they claimed to use. A Bible where the God of Jesus can be found, but was ignored by those slavery supporters. It's a book full of radical ideas, full of stories of God opposing oppression and loving the oppressed and calling God's people to do that too. And enslaved Americans found hope in those stories. Hope in the founding version of the religion of a brutal slave culture that no longer honored the teachings of many of those stories. Hope in the God of love. Hope in the God of the Hebrews who sided against oppression over and over and over again. Hope in the God of Jesus who saw all as equal, whether slave or free. Hope in the God who embraced them as wholly human and worthy of love. Enslaved Americans were legally all set free in 1865. But sadly, tragically, those free men and free women and their children and children's children were not by law provided equal rights by any stretch of the imagination until 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Even today, there has yet to be equal access to rights. There is not equity. And the repercussions of the inequity of being treated as slaves and later, while free, being treated as second-class citizens, repercussions from those injustices live on. There is still an undeniable disparity in the wealth, opportunities, and justice available to many of the descendants of Africans dispersed from their homeland to be enslaved as Americans. For Black Americans, there remains continuing exposure to levels of hatred and racism in all walks of life. Yet against the odds that such disparity has created for centuries, there have been many great Black Americans, known and unknown. And I'm going to lift up the names of just some, like heroic anti-slavery leaders Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and Frederick Douglass. Like civil rights activists Marian Anderson, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and the late Jesse Jackson. Like political leaders Shirley Chisholm, Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, and Raphael Warnock. Like Supreme Court Justices Thurgood Marshall, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Clarence Thompson. Like scientists George Washington Carver, Mae Jemison, and Kizzmekia Corbett. Like writers Phyllis Wheatley, Maya Angelou, and Ibram X. Kendi. Like entertainers Oprah Winfrey, Denzel Washington, and James Earl Jones. Like sports heroes Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, and Serena Williams. Like clergy Bishop Richard Allen, Reverend Dr. James Cone and Reverend Dr. Dolores Williams. And did you know, both our National United Church of Christ President, Reverend Dr. Karen Thompson, and our wonderful conference minister, Reverend Dr. Davina Jones, are black women. And there are posters of other prominent American black men and women in the hallway. There's some pictures on your bulletin. The list of them goes on and on and on. And of course, in addition to well-known men and women from history, there were and are also good and great ordinary people, just like you and me, only they have had to live in the shadow of racism. And to show how ridiculous racism is, how illogical skin color discrimination is, I'm going to tell you about a wonderful twist in my own life. In my late 30s, I learned that my great-grandmother on my mother's side purportedly told my father that she was 1/8 African American. My father was a racist. And by the time he told me that, he hated my mother's side of the family, and he told me what would be great news in a disparaging, derogatory manner. In one way or another, he meant to smear my mother's side of the family, but of course I found it wonderful to possibly have a line of blood, even if it was just 1/64th link to another great ethnicity. And I have to say, possibly, because I've not been able to confirm it, but I love it to be true. And it seems odd that anyone in my family, or frankly anywhere else, could find having black history disparaging. But racists, including my father, did and do that sort of thing. Have you ever heard of the one-drop rule? Throughout our nation's history, well into the 20th century, race was governed by a strangely, uniquely American one-drop rule. It held that if you had one drop of black blood, you were black for purposes of the law. And that one drop could be the difference between enslavement and freedom, segregation and oppression. And if my father was telling the truth, and I hope he was, as great as that news is in another place and time, I might have been subject to mistreatment as a black American under the one-drop rule. In the United States, including California, I might not have been allowed to drink from certain water fountains, sit in certain restaurants, swim in certain pools, play on certain beaches, or even marry my wife for 47 years. Labeling race by a traceable amount of blood is called the hypodescent rule, meaning that racially mixed persons are assigned the status of the so-called subordinate group. And that rule lingers today. It's why Tiger Woods, who's 1/4 African American, is considered black. And President Obama, who's half white, is considered black. And so this very white-looking, white-raised pastor who may have what racist cultures and racist falsely labeled tainted blood might not have been allowed to marry his wife in this state until 1948. And that would have been only one of the oppressions imposed on people with the slightest hint of history, like I've heard about my great-grandmother and all of her ancestors and her descendants. And make no mistake about it, the threat to me has only been academic or indirect, and it shows how ridiculous racism is. It's made up nonsense with god-awful consequences. But raised as a white person, I was not victimized. Doors were not shut to me. I have not been subject to racial profiling or ungodly epithets or any of the other horrors 1/64th black blood might have brought about. And of course, I would have never considered my blood tainted, but potentially filled with a diversity that even the notion of I am deeply grateful for. No person of any race or ethnic background of any percentage should be subjected to racism, a deeply sinful act. It's chilling that people are hated or subject to violence because of the content of their blood or the color of their skin. Everyone is made in the image of God equally. Which brings me to today's reading that EJ did so nicely. First 5 books of the Bible are called Torah, and although legend has it Torah was written by Moses, in all likelihood it wasn't. Using modern investigative tools and reasoning, Bible scholars have uncovered a few basic sources for Torah. And I'm going to talk about just one for a moment, about the source scholars call the priestly writers. They lived through the Babylonian exile and understood that dysphoria created serious concerns for the people of Israel, including a sense of being barren, without heirs, crowded out, subservient, and dominated by other nations. And this is what the Jews in dysphoria during the exile experienced. And it's similar to how others in dysphoria might feel later in time, including Africans kidnapped and shipped to America. Many African Americans have found a deep connection to the Bible stories relating to the mistreatment of the Hebrews, who were also enslaved and forcibly dispersed. And the priestly writers' response to this dysphoria included a central proclamation, a sort of mantra, which theologically counters concerns about being barren, being without heirs, being crowded out, being subservient, being dominated. And the proclamation is found in Genesis 1:28, in the verses we heard this morning in Egypt. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion." Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann explains how each part of the verse refutes concerns arising from the exile. Be fruitful refutes barrenness. Multiply refutes heirlessness. Fill the earth refutes crowdedness. Subdue refutes subserviency. And having dominion refutes being dominated. Brueggemann notes that, quote, "This proclamation is strikingly appropriate to a people of exile who are homeless and rootless, alienated from land and traditions, and affirmation that their God is still in charge, and therefore that their destiny is still well-being and dominance." Thus, the word is an amazing challenge to a hopeless historical situation, end quote. The priestly proclamation can be found repeated in the tradition of Israel, carrying its intention from the creation story to the promised land. Israel's soured by life experience life as being fruitful, broken, and dominated by others. But the proclamation cleverly claims that although the exile may be experienced as the fountainhead of chaos, God intends otherwise. In effect, the priestly writers reimagine life for Israel, and they ask Israel to look at life anew. Genesis 1 can help us to understand the reimagination from a dark, formless void that Genesis starts with, from chaos that creates order. And since the exile was a chaotic experience, the creation story offered hope that order can come from chaos. Indeed, Genesis 1 demonstrates God's power over chaos through word alone. With word, God creates order out of chaos. God orders days of the week and creation, and all of creation is good. And the sixth day is the most important day in Genesis 1. It's when all humans are given the status of being made in God's image. And we're not only all created equal images of God, but meant to be God's emissaries on earth. We are given the status of having dominion over the earth, God's partners who act, or are supposed to act, as caretakers of creation. All humans are given God's blessing of divine empowerment. John Brocky, my Old Testament professor, summed up nicely the effect of Genesis 1. He said the priestly writer's creation story provides a powerful affirmation about God's power to order chaos and about the decisive role of humankind in God's creation. For exiles, an alternative view of what it means to be human. To be human does not mean to be this color or that, as some human cultures or subcultures are wont to claim. But to God, to be human is to be made from the start in God's image and to be caretakers of creation with God's blessing. Each of us are made divinely empowered, equal human beings. And the trouble is not in how God made us, but in how humans have mistreated others God has made. It is because humans have failed to fulfill their charge to be God's partners as careful caretakers of creation. Humans have defied and desecrated the divine nature of other humans with things like slavery, segregation, ridiculous one-drop rules, and all the other awfulness of racism, past and present. And while the Bible offers hope and God's love for all, some humans profane creation with sinful hate of the very things God calls good. Very good. The priestly writers facing this sort of stuff during the exile reimagined God in light of the oppression and found the God of love who made humans sacred and holy. And the good news is that's how God imagined humans from the beginning. Not one of us is or ever has been any less sacred or holy or worthy of love by God. Not one of us. In Latin, a phrase we heard and studied a lot in seminary is Imago Dei, image of God. Imago Dei. As Imago Dei, images of God, as emissaries of the holy on earth, humans are called to be holy, as God is holy. And now a human is less sacred, or less holy, or less worthy, or less loved. My God, the good news is that all humans are created in the image of God, and so each person is entitled to treatment as a holy being. That's the godly way. And it needs to be the earthly way. It needs to be